I'll tell you just briefly about myself. Oh, I've got to say, got it on the recording. Okay, here we go. Um, so I work for Beaver Valley Hospital, and we have a small behavioral health clinic here. We also have a home health and hospice that we provide counseling for. There are two therapists here, myself and another. Um, and we also have our hands in a lot of things that go on in the community. We contract with our schools and provide consultation and crisis management for students at our schools. I also contract with our local jail and provide substance abuse treatment for inmates at the Beaver County Jail. A little bit about me, I was born and raised in a tiny town called Minersville. 800 people live there. And my wife always jokes and says, we're not going to let it go to 801. So if someone wants to move in, someone has to die. I have a morbid sense of humor, so you're just going to have to roll with that. Um, so my introduction to EMDR therapy was in 1992. I was a senior graduating from SUU, had been accepted into UNLV's MSW program. And my professor came to me and said, "Hey, Paul, there is this new therapy. It's brand new. The research behind it is really strong. You should look into it." And he said, and I said, "Oh, really? What is it?" And he said, "It's called EMDR." And I said, "EMDR, what is that?" And he said, "Well, it's eye movement desensitization and reprocessing." And I said, "Well, what is that?" And he goes, "Well, it's something like you move your fingers in front of their eyes while they're talking about something." And I looked at him and I said, "That is hocus pocus. I will never do that." Well, guess what? 30 years later, here I am, gone full circle, and I'm all in. I was trained in EMDR in 2017, certified as an EMDR therapist in 2020. Uh, Started doing consultation at that time, and now I'm a consultant in training. Um, my connection or my consultant is Mary Ray, who has worked with Dini Laliotis for 20 years, who worked with Francine Shapiro for 20 years, who Francine is the inventor, I guess is what we would call her, of EMDR. So even even my, oh, I'm admitting someone else into the room. So even me, missing my opportunity to learn EMDR back in the day in 1992, I'm still extremely close to like the gurus of the field. And matter of fact, I was just in a training over the weekend with Dini Laliotis. I got to tell you, I had like my Taylor Swift experience, if you will. She knows me, she knows my name, she knows my face, and she cornered me as I was walking into the conference and made me talk to her. Um, my daughter's a Swiftie. I consider myself a Dini, and that's like I will follow Deanie wherever she goes. She is like the top researcher and presenter in EMDR right now, and I'll tell you, I freaked out. I froze up. I don't even know if I told her my name. I didn't need to. She already knew it, but it was just weird. So anyway, that's my story with Deanie Laliotis, and that just happened Saturday. So I'm still a little weird about it. Anyway, into my presentation. Well, here we go, maybe. Okay. So eye movement desensitization and reprocessing started out as a technique. It is now considered a full-fledged psychotherapy. It's comprehensive, it's integrative, and it consists of treatment protocols and techniques. It's guided by the adaptive information processing model, and we're going to talk about all of those things more as we go along. The standard approach to EMDR therapy is comprised of 8 phases and 3-pronged methodology to identify and reprocess past experiences that underlie present difficulties, current situations that are disturbing, anticipatory anxieties, and needed skills to develop adaptive responses for future demands. In my opinion, of course I'm biased, but it's the whole enchilada here. You can treat any disorder with EMDR. And all of us, the more I've studied it, all of us have our own traumas, and we have negative beliefs attached to those traumas. And those negative beliefs pop up in our current day situations that are linked to our original trauma that we try to handle in a way that is typically maladaptive. So going back to my meeting Deanie and actually having a conversation with her, all of my insecurities of my childhood blew up right there. I froze anyway, and that's kind of an example of how it all works. EMDR is a continuum from a brief intervention to a comprehensive approach. There are over 200 protocols now associated with EMDR therapy, all the way from brief, short-term interventions to long-term complex PTSD treatment. EMDR was originally designed as a treatment for PTSD alone, but as time has gone on, it is actually being utilized in, I mean, everything you can imagine, all treatment needs across the spectrum. Some of the premises for EMDR is most therapies are about talking about life experiences. EMDR is generating life experiences. And how I would even take that a little bit further is that it regenerates life experiences. So if you have an experience in your past that is negative, where the experience was maladaptively stored and inadequately processed, you can redo that, so to speak, so that the negativity associated with that is desensitized and reprocessed and relabeled so that you have a different perspective about the future. AIP, the Adaptive Information Processing Model, is a model that was also developed by Francine Shapiro, and it is the conceptual framework for understanding EMDR. It is experientially driven, facilitates a reprocessing of the formative negative experience by activating memory networks where these maladaptive learnings are stored. It creates new opportunities for learning by generating more adaptive experiences that lead to an integration of the earlier memories within the context of the client's life. And it optimizes the client's responses to current and future life demands. And I'm rolling 100 miles an hour. Any thoughts or questions right now? Nope, just keep rolling. Okay. So Francine Shapiro was a therapist in New York. And in 1987, she was working with a very difficult client. And she was walking, I think it was Central Park, although I don't know that for a fact, but she was walking in the park one day, reflecting on the challenges that she faced, and realized that when these really hard memories came up, that they would kind of disappear. And as time went on, she realized that as she was doing this, that she would move her eyes back and forth in her head, and she would have an emotional release, and these disturbing memories would go away. And literally, that is how EMDR was discovered. So, EMDR has been around for what, 37 years? Is that right? Yeah. It's relatively new. Francine died last year, and there's been a little bit of competition, it seems, from the leaders in the field right now to who's going to, rise to the top. And not because she's my favorite, but it does appear that Deanie Laliotis is the one who is taking it to the next level. And she's the one that's really embracing it to be a comprehensive treatment approach. Um, I've used several different protocols, and had, I mean, honestly, it's the best treatment I have ever provided. No question about that. I've been a therapist for 27 years and very well versed in CBT, and good at it. And honestly, EMDR is, in my opinion, far and away better than CBT. Um, I still use CBT, but I integrate it into my EMDR treatment. I use it to generalize the things that have been learned and processed so that there are greater, what's the word I'm looking for? Um, Successes in the future. They adapt and handle things more effectively. Now, I'm not going to lie, EMDR, when you get in the middle of complex trauma with a client, it's hard and it's ugly. And, you can't get around that. If you're dealing with complex trauma, it's not easy. And it never is, and it's never quick. It's never a quick solution with complex trauma. Now, single event traumas, EMDR is very quick. It works real well. In fact, there are studies out there that show 80 to 90% resolution of single incident traumas. So the 8 phases are, first of all, client history, then preparation, assessment, desensitization, installation, body scan, closure, and reevaluation. And that's the standard protocol, and all other protocols are a branch off of this. There's different protocols for, like stress management. I've actually adapted some things for high school kids in athletics and had tons of success helping them just kind of stay focused and stay calm so that they can perform at their highest level. So history taking, first part of the EMDR, the first phase is to get a history from your client. In essence, that's where you just gather information about their history, traumatic events, current symptoms, and coping mechanisms. I also add a diagnostic evaluation into the history taking for insurance billing. A lot of therapists, they don't necessarily do that, but those therapists also aren't billing insurances, and so they usually just take cash payments. And so, but if you're working under the insurance industry, you do need to figure out how to have a diagnosis. A treatment plan is built right into the system. You don't really have to develop a separate treatment plan other than as you're going through the phases, a treatment plan is naturally built in. Although if I am billing an insurance company, I usually do an external treatment plan just so that, all my T's are crossed and my I's are dotted. Next phase is preparation phase, and that's where we educate the client about EMDR, discuss any coping techniques that work for them, what doesn't work for them, experiences they've had in the past, establish trust and rapport. A lot of times during this phase, I will use a lot of skills, and I use CBT skills as well as DBT skills in the preparation phase to help prepare clients. Because sometimes when you get in the processing, like I said, it gets a little bit ugly, and clients need to have skills to cope. And if they don't have those skills, then that can be a kind of a derail episode as you're working through some of the most sensitive things in their life. So following these 8 phases is really important. Preparation is super important. Helping people feel safe and comfortable within their surroundings is very, very important. There's a couple of things we look for in preparation as well. One of those is a state shift. And that is where a client can go from, like an aroused state to a calm state. And if they have that ability, it's golden. You can go through and do the processing. I'll be honest, as a therapist, that's sometimes really, really hard to see. Sometimes it's like so easy, but there are times when it's like, holy cow, can this client shift states? And when, and that there's also some techniques and protocols established to help teach clients how to shift states. So that's kind of a good thing as well. Then we move on to the assessment phase, and this is where we identify a specific target or experience to process during the EMDR sessions. And these targets are usually linked to distressing memories or beliefs. There are a lot of techniques to help you go back in time if necessary. Usually the areas to look for in processing are either first or worst experience. So the first experience is called the touchstone experience, and that is maybe their first traumatic experience that they remember. The other area of entry is the worst. So those two areas are usually what we look for, and we try to use one of those to as the target for processing. Okay, so the desensitization phase. Now this, in most contexts, the desensitization phase is considered EMDR. And that is where you do the finger waving or whatever type of bilateral stimulation that may be utilized to help access the stored memories in the brain. And bilateral stimulation is the method of accessing all of those stored memories. Bilateral stimulation, there's several different forms of it. I personally prefer finger waving. There's light. Some therapists have lights that blink that people can follow with their eyes. Telehealth, there's a whole thing that's developed via telehealth for EMDR treatment. And they just slide dots across the screen for clients to watch. There's tapping. There's different methods of tapping that can be utilized. So it's, when I was trained back in 2017, the direction was very narrow. They really wanted you to focus on eye movements via using your fingers or a pen or something like that the client could watch. Then COVID hit, and that kind of changed everything. And honestly, it opened up a whole bunch of doors for offering services. And that's where, the dots across the screen came into play. There's actually a program that I use personally. It's called Remote EMDR, and it is a program designed for EMDR treatment. It's a documentation system, and it has all of the things necessary to offer treatment. So desensitization phase is very systematic, and that's also where the treatment plan is kind of developed. And you start by identifying the target memory, and then a negative belief associated with that target memory, and then a positive belief that the client would rather focus on and rather believe about themselves. And then there's what's called the SUD, which is, I don't remember what SU stands for, but it's the level of disturbance that the client feels in association with the memory. And then there's also the VOC, which is the validity of the cognition, which is how you track the installation of the positive belief associated with the memory. And so the goal is to desensitize to 0 and then install the positive belief associated with that memory to a 7. So the scale for the SUD is 0 to 10. So you identify the target memory, then you identify the emotion associated with that target memory, identify the SUD, say it's 7, and then through processing, that goes down to 0. And then you install the new belief. And when you start that new belief, usually it's at a 3 or a 4. And as you associate the two together, you install that new belief up to a 7. And when a 7 is achieved, then that's where the memory is intact. So I just went through the installation phase as well. Once you get to a 7, then you go to a body scan. You ask the client to simply close their eyes, start at the top of their head, and scan their body and notice any tension or tightness associated with the memory. If they do notice any, you just reprocess that until it goes down to a 0. Typically, you don't have to reinstall a positive belief with that. Sometimes you do. And then you move on to closure. And closure is it's a whole ball game in and of itself. So you're trying to do all this in a matter, okay, not all 8 phases, but usually you start the desensitization phase at the beginning of a session, and you're really trying to finish that out by the 50-minute time frame. And honestly, EMDR sessions should be designed to be 90 minutes, in my opinion, or even 120. But the insurance industry doesn't work that way, and so we have to adjust and make things work. And so closure, there are several ways to close a session that's incomplete, and that's basically where you just tell the client, okay, we're running out of time. And you got to be careful how you say this, because you don't want to just leave somebody wounds wide open and have them, well, okay, I'm out of time, we're done, see ya. Doesn't work that way. So you talk to them about, and I prepare people for this too before, so that's a really important phase of this. But then just remind them that we're out of time and we need to close the session. And then there are some closure techniques, container techniques, or some other techniques utilized to close the session. And then next session, reevaluation, and that's the beginning of each session. We reevaluate the last week or however long it's been since our last session, find positive things that have happened, negative things that have happened, anything that may be associated with the memory, any triggers, any dreams. Dreams get, for whatever reason, this activates the dream cycle a lot in clients. And a lot of times in between sessions, they have dreams that are linked to their traumatic memory. And they go on in that. And then that leads us, actually, that's a very important thing, because you can link it to the traumatic memory, and that gives you an in to start right back into the desensitization phase again. Okay, so I just ran a mile and a half in a very short period of time. So anybody have any thoughts or questions at this point? Is this making sense? Does it seem like it's flowing okay? We good that way? Okay, so now you've got kind of an idea of the standard protocol. We're going to talk about the 3-pronged approach, past, present, future, and that is directly linked to the adaptive information processing model. So the adaptive information processing model is the theoretical framework underlying EMDR. And the basic premise in the AIP model is that the human body heals itself naturally. So the human body has a natural tendency to process trauma towards a healthy outcome. We normally process and integrate experience towards healthy resolution, and that's a good thing. But the fight or flight mechanism and our brain, they don't just allow everything to just flow so smoothly in the human body. So when we are exposed to serious trauma, our brain kicks in the way that it's supposed to, and the defensive mechanisms take place. And a lot of times we lock away memories and store them in the back of our mind, so that we can live life. That's usually where the problem lies, is because usually they're maladaptively stored, they're locked away, and inadequately processed, which is fine at the time, but 10 years, 20 years down the road, when something in life happens that triggers, then they flare up and it comes out. and we wonder, what is going on with this? Why did I just have that reaction? And it's completely linked to the car accident you were in when you were 4, or something along those lines. So, bilateral stimulation is the mechanism that facilitates the processing of the traumatic memories. It unlocks that subconscious part of our brain and allows these memories to come about. Now, as I'm talking about this, I just, there are a lot of people trained in EMDR, and you can go through basic training and feel like you can wave your fingers in front of somebody's eyes and it's all good. Until you have an experience with someone who has a flooding of trauma that you can't stop and you have no idea what to do, and they're calling you at 3 o'clock in the morning because it just won't stop. And it seems like they're reliving all of their experiences over and over and over and over again. Okay, that is an awful place to be as a therapist. That is an awful place to be as a person in treatment. And so with that, consultation is extremely important. And that's the thing that I see that's not happening with people who are trained in EMDR today, is consultation isn't happening. I know in Southern Utah, there about a month ago, maybe 2 months ago, there were 30 or 40 people who completed basic training. And I know my name was offered, and another therapist that I know's name was offered as consultants available to help them as they've gone along. And nobody has reached out for consultation. And I'm telling you, that is not the way to do EMDR therapy. When I was first trained, I went with it. I jumped in both feet and went with it, and had a couple of amazing, miraculous experiences where people who got well had never been well before. And then I had a couple of clients who couldn't stop the flooding, and I didn't know what to do, and I didn't have the resources to deal with that. And so, again, it's just very, very important to focus on getting trained and then also following that training with consultation. If you want to be a good EMDR therapist, you need to do consultation and you need to go all the way with it. It costs money. I'm not going to lie. I've dumped a pile of money into being an EMDR therapist. And I'm telling you what, I am 1,000 times better today because of consultation than I was, a few years ago. I fell into, like I said, I fell into just a lucky situation with my consultant. She's actually in Washington, D.C. Well, Virginia actually is where she practices. With Zoom, I do consultation via Zoom, and I'm able to talk through cases with her and work on things that are very, very challenging. I've got hard clients. I've got clients that have complex trauma, and they have all kinds of issues that are very, very challenging for them and for me as a therapist. And without that consultation, I would never be able to get through it. So a big spiel there for consultation. When you do get trained, if you're interested in getting trained, don't stop at the basic training, continue on down the line. And I'll be honest, I will be in consultation as long as I'm providing EMDR therapy. That will never change at this point. I will stay in it. As long as I'm trying to do this, I'm going to keep going with it. And it's kind of interesting. I mean, when you get the opportunity to be in the same room with people who like are the top of the field, it is amazing. I was able to watch Deanie provide therapy on Sunday. So the other thing about it that's a challenge is all of their trainings take place either Friday, Saturday, Sunday, or Saturday, Sunday. Anyway, but I watched Deanie do EMDR with a patient on Sunday, and I am telling you what, it was nothing short of amazing to watch the person who is the leading researcher in the field right now providing treatment and seeing her do what she did, I probably learned more in that 45 minutes than I've learned in I don't even know how long, about how to provide effective treatment. So if you get that opportunity to see someone that knows what they're doing, I highly, highly recommend that. Okay, any thoughts or questions at this point?
Paul,
Yeah.
um, what ages did you say is EMDR good for?
Um, Honestly, any age, I am not a child EMDR therapist. There are child EMDR therapists out there. I have done treatment or EMDR with my youngest is probably 10 years old, um, and had moderate success with her, although it wasn't as clean as I wanted it to be. So I referred her to a child EMDR therapist, and they're hard to find. I'll be honest, child EMDR therapists are hard to find. EMDR
So
therapy,
there's a difference between the EMDR training for children and for like teens, adults. Is there a difference between all of
yes,
those?
yeah, there is. I mean, the standard protocol is pretty much the same, but how you apply it is very, very different with kids. I mean, kids, I can sit in a room with an adult and have them stare and wave at my fingers and it works just fine. But when I'm doing EMDR with children, I'm having them, we're playing Uno, we're doing shoots and ladders, we're doing whatever, we're playing with kinetic sand, and they're talking about this, that, and the other. And every so often I'll bring up the memory, I'll bring up the emotion, and we'll do this. And it's a challenge. I've had just a smidgen of child training in EMDR therapy. But again, yes, it is a whole different ball game.
So you can pick which clientele you're going to work with, which age
You
group,
can. Yeah,
and there's specific training to those.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, sand tray therapy goes really well with EMDR therapy for kids, actually for adults too. I'm not trained in sand tray, although that is on my list of things to get trained in. But sand tray therapy really is a quick and easy way to identify targets and jump right into things. So that's pretty cool. Like I said, EMDR therapy has become a complete and total comprehensive therapeutic approach. It's not just a technique anymore. It's honestly the way to do business. For me personally, every client I see automatically is filtered through the adaptive information processing model.
Mhm.
And that's how I find out their core memories. That's how I find out their negative beliefs about themselves. That's I find out when things happened, all by looking at things through, that lens of past, present, and future, and you start to connect the dots of how this event, when they were 7, all of a sudden is linked to the event that happened when they're 27, and it's it's just it's a phenomenal approach for providing treatment, in my opinion. I have fully settled into it. There's protocols for substance use treatment. There's protocols, obviously, for post-traumatic stress disorder. There's protocols for depression, anxiety, obsessive compulsive disorder. I mean, I could go on and on. Like I said, there's over 200 different protocols that have been developed at this point. And I'm telling you, I don't know half of them. And I don't know that I want to. I'm gonna stay within my little realm of what I do and just go with that.
Okay, thank you. That's what I was wondering.
Okay, you're welcome. So this is called the window of tolerance. So the window of tolerance is where we try to work in EMDR therapy, and the window of tolerance is linked to the fight or flight mechanism. So you'll notice, can you guys see my cursor moving there? So we have the hypoaroused, and then the comfort zone. Okay, so hypoaroused is the freeze response. That is where we get locked into trauma. We dissociate, we disconnect, we're on autopilot, we're not present, we shut down. And that is not a good place to be when trying to do anything, honestly, and especially treatment. And so when I talked about a state shift before, this is kind of what we're looking at here is how can we move from this hypoaroused state into this comfort zone, this window of tolerance right here, this yellow box. Or if we're hypoaroused, we need to do a shift state back into the comfort zone as well. And the hypoaroused part of the fight or flight mechanism is where we're anxious, we're overwhelmed, we are really amped up. We could have bursts of anger or aggression or rage. And honestly, if you can see my cursor here, EMDR treatment is typically done right here, the bottom end of the hyperaroused box and the top end of the window of tolerance. That's kind of where the most effective treatment takes place. Now, this comfort zone, if you will, there's tons of research out there on the comfort zone or the window of tolerance. Performance across the board is better in the window of tolerance. There are studies out there that show emotionally regulated kids get better grades, perform better in all of their activities, do better at home, handle conflict and challenge better. And so the goal is to help people learn how to live in this yellow box right here. That's where when we settle and we finish EMDR treatment, that's where people stay for the most part. Now, we're obviously going to have our natural fight or flight responses to situations, and our brain is going to work the way that it's supposed to. If we're being chased by a mountain lion, well, hopefully we have the fight or flight response that kicks in and we get out of that situation. I mean, we want that to happen. But for school, performance, work, all of those things, if we can stay in the window of tolerance, our ability to be successful, it's huge. So, thoughts or questions about the window of tolerance? I'll be honest, this was one of the coolest things I learned. As I didn't know about this, and maybe it's because I just hadn't been informed or whatever. But when I started studying EMDR, I learned about the window of tolerance. I developed a whole slideshow and treatment, or not treatment, but professional development lesson for our school district. And I was one of the presenters at one of their professional development days, and we taught window of tolerance, and we talked about ideas on what they could do to get kids into their window while they were in school, relaxation techniques, breathing techniques, just playing soft music, sunshine, just little things like that to help kids kind of get in the zone so that they could perform better. And interestingly enough, for about 3 years, that stuck and our teachers used it. And I got random reports back of how they loved it. Well, since then, of course, they get stuck in their ways and they don't do that anymore. So I've actually been hitting up our superintendent to have me come back in and do another window of tolerance training to reintroduce all of these things back to our teachers and have them start to implement that into their classrooms. Any questions? So EMDR as a standalone therapy, the research behind it is solid, and I pulled this off of, I just went to the National Institute of Health and found the Permanente Journal. I guess I don't even know where that came from, but this is just some information about how effective EMDR treatment is. Single trauma victims no longer had PTSD after 3 90-minute sessions of EMDR. Some have found 84 to 90% of single trauma victims have complete resolution of their trauma. The research behind it, and this was just a review of literature page that I grabbed. It wasn't a specific study. This was just a combination of studies that were done. The research behind it is impeccable. CBT is the most widely researched therapy on the planet, and the research behind EMDR is stronger than CBT, although EMDR has not been utilized as long as CBT has been. So CBT still holds its own and it's still useful. Like I said, I use CBT especially when I'm trying to get the generalization effect after I've completed a memory. The one thing that I didn't put in that I want to talk about is that once you complete a memory, the next thing to do is what's called a future template. And that's where you get your generalization effect. And that's where we plant in skills and beliefs, and we create a vision of how they want to handle similar situations in the future successfully. And then you strengthen that by adding a positive belief associated with that memory. And that it takes it, one of the frustrations I always had as a CBT therapist was my clients would get it here, but they wouldn't get it all the way through their body. Adding eye movements to the treatment helps it sink into the soul, so to speak, and helps it go deeper and have stronger generalization effects. And that's really all I have. I didn't know who to prepare for. I didn't know who my audience was going to be. So hopefully this was a good overview for you. I'm available if you have questions, if you want to talk to me about how you want to approach your future as in training or to get certified. I would be happy at any time to talk to you about that. And so I'll give you my phone number. It's 435-691-2239. My email address is plmarshall@beaverhospital.net.
I'm
Should
adding
I
them
put
into
that
the
in the
chat
chat?
for you too.
Oh, you did? Okay. Yeah. I'll add my email as well. I actually have two emails. I'll put them both on there. So my goal, I will be eligible for retirement in 2 years from Beaver Hospital. My goal is to become a basic trainer for the Center for Excellence, which is Dini Leliotis's organization, and then be a consultant and then provide EMDR treatment just privately. That's kind of where I would like to go in my future. Now, obviously, the almighty dollar is probably going to have as much to say about that as anything else because the cost of living is skyrocketing right now, and I don't know if my retirement is going to keep up with that. But I'm hoping to really just do more and more EMDR treatment. I've really revamped my own personal practice to integrate EMDR in almost every situation that I am in. Being in a small town, it's hard because I can't be super selective about who I see. But honestly, I feel extremely comfortable providing EMDR treatment for teenagers and adults. Children with not complex trauma, I'm pretty comfortable with, but if they have super complex trauma, I would recommend that they go to a more specialized provider than what I am. So I feel like I have just opened up the floodgates of information. Um, there's a lot to it. Everything that I talked about today could be broken down into a several hour conversation or training. Um, today was just an overview. Yeah, I feel like I'm rambling now, so I would love to take any questions that you might have, even if they seem silly or weird, throw them at me and let's see what we can talk about.
I think that was really cool that you had a way to integrate this into the schools. And
Hmm.
I think letting other school systems know that, or um, schools know that this is possible would be really good. I think it sounds like especially hearing that it's been effective. So,
Yeah. I mean, if kids, there's interesting things. There's a few things we've learned about kids across the years. One, they found out that serving breakfast to children changed behavior more than any other behavioral program they could implement into the school system. Okay, so that tells you when kids are uncomfortable, they don't act right. Okay, and they don't learn. And so with that information, if we take that a little bit further and we can say, okay, now we got their bellies full. Now, if we can teach them some emotional regulation skills, just brief ones. Now, obviously, we're not going to process trauma in a classroom, but if we can just get them to down regulate just a little bit so their focus and their attention is better, and we can get them in that window of tolerance, their learning and their performance is going to skyrocket. Testing skyrockets. I mean, if you've ever studied anything on John Gottman, he has Raising the Emotionally Intelligent Child. He talks about that in that book of how important that it is to keep children regulated. And I see the information from EMDR just blending so well with that research because you can use some of these skills. Like I've had kids who have won state championships in wrestling and football after I did a little bit of EMDR treatment with them and just got them into a zone. I'm not trying to float my own boat here. I'm just saying that this stuff works and helps kids perform at their best. My own son, he took the ACT, and he's a pretty smart kid, um, and got a 22, which is not a bad score at all. Um, and he just said he was so nervous he couldn't focus, and so I bought tappers from Cindy Jones. I don't know if you know what they are, the bilateral tappers that you can hold that pulse in your hands. And I got him on those for about the next 3 months. And then he took the ACT again. He scored 27 and then 28 and then 28. Um, that jump is unheard of, honestly, in the ACT. That's like a standard deviation above. I don't know how all that stuff works. I'm not the greatest at research, but anyway, if we can get kids regulated, their lives will change. Thus, the importance of dealing with their trauma and being effective at it.
thank you. That's really cool to hear. That's great. And yes, the BiTappers are a good resource too.
They are, and they were developed out of Cindy's
Hmm.
training with EMDR. Cindy's the one. It's her fault I'm in this. She's the one. Cindy and I go way back, and she convinced me to give it a try because I held on to that hocus pocus mentality that I had in 1992 for a really long time. Interestingly enough, Dini Liliotis started EMDR training in 1992. So like my hero in the field started the same year I was introduced to it. And I'm thinking, yep, you could have been her.
That's amazing. Yeah, Cindy's pretty awesome. Well, thank you so much. Is there any other questions or comments? Thank you very much. That was very interesting. Bridger, did you have anything?
No, that was perfect. It was It was the kind of information that I hope more more practitioners will be exposed to, especially with the consulting. I feel like that kind of information, knowing the relevance of that, especially in rural areas, helps them to understand like, okay, yes, there is an associated cost, but the level of care that you're able to provide is so much more robust. And I'm glad that you spoke to that. Thank you.
Yeah, and the cool thing about the world we live in now, I mean, 10 years ago, I would have never been able to get the consultation I have gotten. How would I have ever met up with a person in Virginia to get consultation? It would have never happened. So, it's really, I mean, I feel like the effectiveness of treatment is going to skyrocket because we can actually consult. Like I'm like third generation when you think about that, to the top of EMDR treatment. It went from Francine to Deanie to Mary to me. And that's crazy that I mean, that's a link that I guess that's fourth generation, but whatever. Um, it's insane to me to think about that. Like if I think of Sigmund Freud, and he's like the father of modern psychology. I'm that close to the person who developed this model, and that's just unreal. So, the growth that's going to come in the next 20 years of EMDR is going to be mind blowing in my opinion. And I'll be honest, I also believe that it's going to take over and be the primary method of treatment for mental health disorders in the next 10 or 15 years.
Yeah, I agree. As a part of this grant, the Cambia grant, we were shadowing various professionals in rural areas, and we're going to publish those on a course that people can explore when they're looking into different fields, and that was talked about multiple times, EMDR therapy, and they highlighted something similar to what you highlighted in the cognitive behavioral therapy as a an ability to build skills so that you can regulate kind of yourself. But without EMDR, you won't be able to access all those memories and move through the trauma in the ways that actually healed. And all the students that I've talked to about this, they who have experienced EMDR as well, they report how cognitive behavioral therapy feels almost like a raft, in the middle of an ocean, whereas EMDR actually solves the problem.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I've made the statement, and I might be quoted by this. My consultant or my consultant asked if she could quote me, but I've said my experience is that all other treatment modalities are coping. EMDR is actually healing. And that's honestly the way I see it is, we can teach people to cope, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's okay. But if you really want to heal, you got to take it to the next level, and EMDR is what does that.
Thank you so much for presenting. This was profound.
Well, thanks for having me. It's
I'm gonna
great.
go ahead and stop the recording.